Today I wanted to discuss a topic in iOS that's not heavily discussed or documented. It's called Touch ID. We're going to go through, create a simple application today using Touch ID to authenticate the user's fingerprint and see what that looks like using Swift. So let's go ahead, open up Xcode. We will create a new project, single view. Just call it Touch Testing 2, I guess. I'm going to do Swift today, create. All right, we're going to do this all programmatically. That means we're not going to use a storyboard. So let's open up our view controller, remove did receive memory warning. And let's start by creating some UI elements. Let's do a button. So let's make a login button. And it will be of type UI button. And we'll create an enclosure, which allows for creating elements in the UI a little bit easier because you can manipulate them in a little bit more of an organized fashion. So all we have to do is basically just say let button equal UI button, and we'll instantiate it with a type of button, and we're going to use the system type, which will give us a nice background when we click the button. So we'll return the button, and now we've executed our button. Now what we can do nicely with this closure is we can add anything we want in here. So for example, let's set the title. So we'll set title, right? This will be the initial title. We'll just say login. We'll set it for UI control state of normal. And then we will let's make a background color on the button. We'll make it, I like blue. Since we're going to create this programmatically and set up the constraints programmatically in code without the storyboard, we need to set a property called translates auto resizing masks to false. Otherwise, auto layout would take over and we would not be able to update our button. Let's also set the font color with something called a tint color for that to white. And that looks, I would say, pretty good. One thing we want to do is actually also add in a function when somebody presses this button. So let's do say button, add target, there you are. And we'll say we want to add it into our self. And actually, let's remove this. Don't need that. And let's actually, we'll use a selector, which will have a function called in a second, handle login. And our control state will be just touch down or touch up inside. Pardon me. Touch, where are you? Ah, there you are. Okay, so our button looks set up. Let's create a label now. We'll call it login label of type UI label. We're going to follow the same format we did before. Create our closure, and what is he complaining about? We just don't have our handle login function, pardon me. So we'll create that there, so that error will go away, and we'll come back to this in a second and implement our login function. But let's finish our label. So same process, let label equal UI label. We use the default instantiator, return our label, and we can set properties on this label. So we'll set the initial text. We'll set the initial text to not authorized, I guess we'll say, right? We need to do the same thing we did on our button for constraint wise. We'll set auto resizing masks to false. And we'll set the text alignment of the label so it's on the center. Dot center. Okay, we can let's set a font size on it. Let's say text dot, what is it? Font, sorry. Equals UI font. And we'll say, actually, I'm sorry, we're going to use the initializer on this. What am I doing? System font of size 18. Okay, so that looks pretty good. We can set a text color if we want it with just it's text color equals red, right? All right, awesome. So in our view did load, I like to set up all of our UI views in a certain function called setup views. It's kind of a common function that a lot of programmatic programmers will use. So have setup views like this, and it's going to complain until we create the function below. And there we go. All right, now we can start setting up our views in here. So we need to add our UI controls, I guess, to the view. And so we do that with just calling self.view.add subview, and we can do login button and self.view, add subview, and our login label, right? Okay, so those are in the view. Now, once those are in the view, we need to position them. So we need to set the constraints on the UI elements. And the way we do that is we do one at a time. So we'll start with the login button. And so we need to basically specify when we do constraints in code what the height is, what the width is, and where we want to position it in its super view. Now its super view for this case is its view, which is the one we added it to. So the way we can do that is we'll just put this button actually in the center, and we can use something called anchors, which are very nice conveniently initialized for us. So we can just say center X anchor. That would basically put this into the center of the X axis, and we can say constraint. We can use equal to, and we'll put it equal to its super view, basically the view. So we'll say equal to the center views.center X anchor. Then we need to set this active as true. And so we're going to do the same thing to center the Y coordinates now with the center Y anchor, constraint equal to view.center Y. And we'll set this active equal to true. Oops. Okay, so we specified where we want it. Now we need to specify like how large or how, what's the width and what's the height. So we'll say login button again. Height, there's a height anchor. And constraint equal to this equal to constant. And we can say in here that we want the height, for example, to be 50. And we'll say is active equal to tree. Now we'll do the width. So width anchor, constant equal to, we'll say 150. These are just arbitrary values. You can set these to anything you want. And that's it. Now let's do our login label. So the same way. So we'll say login label. We can actually copy this, make it a little bit easier so we don't have to retype it. Okay. And we'll just say login label. Login label. Okay. Now if we do this, it's going to put it directly on top of the button. We don't want that. We want it to be directly a little bit above. So if I go in and I say, okay, I want the center Y anchor, which is the basically top to bottom coordinate axis, I can go in here and just specify something called a constant. And if I go minus 50, it will put it 50 points above the button. So if I run the UI now and run the project, we should see that show up. There it is. So I have my button and my label. Nothing happens yet because I haven't implemented a functionality. All right, let's go back. So we'll go back and we'll start to handle the Touch ID. All right. So the first thing you have to note is that when you use Touch ID, there's a framework that is included in iOS, but not added into your project called local authentication. And the way we get a hold of that framework is we have to actually import it and embed it into our project. We can't just come here and say import local authentication, because if we do that, what's going to end up happening is when the actual entire project is compiled, it's going to not see this and it's gonna complain. So we need to go up here to go to our project, go under the general section at the bottom where it says linked frameworks and libraries. We need to hit the plus button and we need to search for local authentication framework. Double click it, adds it, make sure it says required and not optional. Ours is required, and we'll go back into our view controller. Make sure you did import this line, otherwise the framework will not be exposed to this class that we have. And then once it's there, we'll have a handle on anything we want to do with Touch ID. Touch ID is passed in through the local authentication framework. And if you option click or command click, sorry, to it, you'll see there's a few different options. Apple specifies something called an object called LA context, which is the class that evaluates the policy. And there's a few different methods. Can evaluate policy, we're going to use this one, and evaluate policy. So the can evaluate policy, which is this one, basically checks if the device is capable of using Touch ID. The evaluate policy is once the device is determined that it has a biometric sensor for your fingerprint, it uses evaluate policy to pass back a value. Sorry, somebody was yelling or something. Okay, so the way we're going to do that is we're going to go down here into our handle login function, and we're going to say handle the Touch ID action, handle the Touch ID here, we'll just say. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is we need to get a hold of that LA context, local authentication context. So we can just create a variable. So we'll say authentication context, equal to LA context, like that. So now we have a handle on that object. We do need to actually specify something called an error here, which will be of type NS error. The reason that we need to do this is that when we're passing around authentication context, there is an error that can be thrown, and it is of type NS error. If we don't have that, or we use an error type, the Swift error, which is the bridged version of the NS error to error, it will not function properly. So what we can do is we can start off by first evaluating the policy. So we'll first check if the device is capable of Touch ID, of, let's say, using Touch ID. And so we'll do that with something called guard, and we'll guard our authentication context can evaluate, this one, which is that function I showed you earlier in the actual class. And so it's asking for something called a policy. And now if I didn't know what to do here, for example, for all the newbies out there, I'd click on can evaluate policy. It gives me some information about the class, but I don't know what this policy is. I want to know what an LA policy is. And you can see if I click it, it takes me to documentation. It's actually an enumeration, which is backed by an integer, and there's two cases. One is device owner authentication with biometrics. That means, let's see, indicates the device owner authenticate using Touch ID. So that means that the device has Touch ID. This means it does not. So we are going to pass in dot device authentication with biometrics. And for our error, we're going to pass in the error that we created. So we'll say and error. Okay, and for our guard statement, we need to return out of it if it does fail. So for example, if this execution or this statement fails, it will just return. And here we can say, we can print for now, the device does not have Touch ID. Okay. And actually, to make it kind of more fun, you could actually create an alert. So I could say show alert no Touch ID. And really quickly, to just show you how to do this, I could just say let alert controller equal to UI alert controller. I think I rely too much on auto completion, to be honest. This is the title of the alert. We'll say no Touch ID. A message of our alert. I'll say Touch ID was not found on this device. Preferred style alert. And we'll add an action of type UI alert action. It has initializer on this as well. And we'll say okay. And I'll be the default, and handler will be nil. Okay. And so what we can do is now we want to add, so we'll say alert control, we're going to add this alert control, this action, add action. We'll just add this action that we created, basically just to dismiss it. And then what we want to do is we want to actually present this this alert to the user. And the best way to do that is to use a dispatch queue. And because this is the UI, we should dispatch it asynchronously on the main queue. And we'll just say self dot present view controller or present, and then we'll say alert controller animated true, completion nil. Okay, and so instead of actually printing out this, the device doesn't have Touch ID, we can just say self dot show alert no Touch ID. So if that fails right away, we know we don't have Touch ID. And this actually might start, actually no, never mind. Okay, so yeah, the next thing we want to do is actually go ahead and just check the fingerprint of the user. So the next is check the fingerprint for valid credentials. Okay, and so the way we're going to do that is with the other method, which is just evaluate the policy. So pretty simply, we just use the authentication context that we have, and we say evaluate our policy, which is this one. And you'll notice if you compare this one to the can evaluate policy, this one, you'll see that right away this one throws back a closure because it's asynchronously going to be compiled. So what's going to happen is you'll get back a Boolean value and an error value, and then we can basically do something based on that, which would be show an alert, log in, present a view controller, etc., whatever you'd want to do for your context. Again, it wants a policy. We'll use the same policy, which is with biometrics. And then what we're going to say is our localized reason. This is actually important because this is actually the message that shows up beneath the Touch ID window. So it's like log in with your fingerprint, or this app would like to use Touch ID. Please use your finger to authenticate. And then the reply. This is probably the most important part of this entire thing. The reply is, like I said, it's going to pass back a value of did it authenticate successfully, true or false, and an error if for some reason it can't read the fingerprint, etc. The user closes the app. So because this is a closure, we know we need to have two values. One is going to be our success, and the other one is our error, right? Like this. In, and in would be in this block. Now, because we're going to manipulate our text label up here, we want to basically say, okay, yeah, let's change the text label to instead of not authenticated, I think we set it up here, let's set it to maybe authenticated or authorized. We need to use something called unknown self in this block. And without getting too far in depth, unknown self basically is just not creating a retain cycle to the objects you utilize in the actual block. So it allows you to very easily not create a retain cycle. And I apologize, that error is because it needs to be in here. Okay. Okay, so first I would say let's go ahead and check if there's an error. I always like to do that, even with JSON networking or anything that's in any type of anything that can throw an error. So we'll say check if error is no. And so we'll just use a guard statement again, and we'll say our error equal to nil, else we want to return again, because we have to return out of our guard statement. And we can print something here if we want. Oops. We can do whatever we want. So for the sake of just being quick and easy, we'll just print there was an error here. Okay. Now at this point, if we pass this check, we know that we have success pretty much. But we don't. Because if you think that the error is what's going to stop your success, it's actually not. Because you can have success, you've successfully authenticated, but technically you can't in the sense because this value of success, for example, right here, is passing a value of true or false, right? The error is not dependent on the success. So the error is like, hey, like I closed my app, I didn't finish being able to check if it was the right fingerprint. This case here, the success, for example, is either it was the right fingerprint or it wasn't. So I don't know if this is true or false, right, when it comes back. So we need to check that. So the way we'll do that is we'll say if success, right, which is the value that we return, so that means that the fingerprint is actually a valid fingerprint, then we want to actually go ahead and push our view controller. We want to basically update our label, change anything we want in the UI. For the sake of this example, we're going to go ahead and just modify our label. So we'll say login label, self.login label dot text equal to authorized, and we'll actually put a capital A there. And this should be dispatched on the main queue as well because this is UI. So let's just go ahead and just say dispatch queue.main.async. Remove that. We'll put this code up here, just like that. And you can handle the success or the failure case with something like a print statement or another alert saying please try again. We'll just say, for the sake of this example, fingerprint is not correct. Okay. And so what we want to do, and I think I'm actually missing a bracket, and then we don't need that one, right? Yeah. Let me just clean this up. Hang on. Okay. Better. And so what we want to do here, we'll run this really quickly, but I think what we want to do here to make it a little bit cleaner and a little bit more attractive is let's add an actual loading indicator so we know that something's happening, because oftentimes when you use Touch ID, there's actually a brief delay. So we get this right now because we're running in the simulator, right? There's no Touch ID on a simulator, right? So we'll say, okay. So let's add in something called an activity indicator. So we'll say let activity indicator, and this is indicator like that. Okay. Okay. So let's actually add in an activity indicator to make the UI a little bit more attractive. So the way that we'll actually go ahead and do that is called an activity indicator. So we'll just say let activity indicator equal to, I'm sorry, of type UI activity indicator view. That's what we want. And it's a closure as well, just like our other UI components. We'll just say let AIV equal UI activity, come on, autocomplete, indicator view. And there's actually a nice little initializer here, and I'm going to explain this really quickly. We don't need to set a frame on it. We want to actually just use a predefined style, which Apple has provided us, which is actually really nice. So we'll use an activity indicator style. And if you actually go into the documentation here, and you actually, I'm just command clicking into this, activity indicator view, there's actually an enumeration on this. We can choose, do we want a gray, white, or white large? For this example, we're going to use gray. Oops, one too far. Just say dot gray, like that. And then we'll return our AIV. And again, AIV dot translate auto resizing masks to constraints. We'll say false, right? And then that, I believe, is all we actually need for activity indicator. We do need to do this, which is add it into our view hierarchy. So same way we did the other UI components. Indicator. We'll just add it in with our add subview. And then for our activity indicator, we actually don't have to specify a height and width because Apple already auto specifies it based on the auto size classing for their class for the view. So it's kind of nice. We just have to say where to put it. So for the sake of this example, we'll put it, we'll just specify the center Y. And we'll say constant equal to the view dot center Y, very similar. And is active equal to true. And then we'll say the activity indicator view dot center X, right? Dot constant equal to view dot center X. is active equal to true. And this will actually place it right above our button. Remember, we don't want that. Let's put it a little bit below our button. I think that would be a little bit nicer. So remember, you can add in something called a constant in here, and we'll position it, let's do like 50 points below the button. So the label will be 50 points above, and the activity indicator will be 50 points below, which will be kind of nice. Okay, so now to get this thing rolling and get the activity indicator actually going, we need to start the activity indicator. Otherwise, if we just run this and add this into our view right here, which I'm running right now, we're not going to see it at all because there's not an idle state of the activity indicator. It's either started or stopped. So there's a method we're going to call on our activity indicator, which is just going to be start animation, another one that's called stop animation. So where do we want to start it? Well, we want to actually start it basically right in the beginning of this. So let's start our activity indicator. I think that's it. I don't know. I'm such a bad speller. Anyways, what we're going to do is here we'll dispatch Q because it is a UI element asynchronously, and we'll say self dot activity indicator dot start animating like that. So that will kick off the animation process. Now we want to actually stop the spinner once we've updated the text. And the place that we actually want to go ahead and do that is down here. So I'm going to call self.stop activity indicator dot stop animation, and that should do it. So if we run this, now obviously this is not going to run correctly in the simulator because we don't have Touch ID, but I'm going to post a video right now. Let me see if I can actually get this phone plugged in. Log in, we'll get this, no Touch ID, right? So I'm going to post a video. Okay, guys, so we're back. I have the application that we wrote loaded up on my phone. So we're going to test it on here because we actually do have Touch ID that we can use. So we'll go ahead and hit login. We are presented with the Touch ID, basically, I guess, alert indicator asking us for a fingerprint. Touch ID for touch testing too. Apparently I spelled touch wrong. And then we get that description that basically is asking like why we want our finger. So I'll go ahead and authenticate with my finger. We get the activity indicator loading. In a second, we are authorized. Awesome. So that's it. So if you guys have any questions, post them in the comments below. Feel free to direct message me if you guys want a copy of the code. I'll try to put it up on GitHub and link it to the channel. And if you guys have any other requests of videos that you guys want to learn any topics about, please let me know. All right.